Caregivers, have you ever felt like nothing? I mean, nothing is going right? Well, cheer up and welcome to Dave the Caregiver's Caregiver radio program, where you'll learn how to avoid that dreaded thing called caregiver burnout and how to survive the grief process. You know, with roughly 100 million caregivers in the U.S. and Canada alone, that's about a third of the population. That means that everyone probably knows someone caring for a loved one. Join Dave and his guests now and every Wednesday at noon Pacific Time as they discuss avoiding caregiver burnout and surviving grief. So find a comfortable place to relax, kick up your feet, and prepare to feel better and to receive practical tips and tools that you can start using immediately to get you through today and every day. And now, here's your host, Dave Nassani. Welcome. A big LA welcome to all my listeners out there in Radio Land. I am Dave, the Caregiver's Caregiver, coming to you live globally through the famous Blog Talk Radio Network, YouTube, iTunes, and the list goes on and on. Yes, folks, I am the guy who's going to help you and guide you through this very difficult journey called caregiving. And we're going to do our very best to help you avoid that dreaded thing called caregiver burnout. Now, we have an exciting show planned for you today, and unfortunately, my lovely co-host Adrian Gruberg, founder of the Caregiver Space, will not be joining us. But today we have author Dr. Larry Force, a licensed clinical social worker and a national board-certified clinical hypnotherapist. And you do not want to miss this show, so stay tuned. Now, if you're new to the show, and we get many new listeners every single week, especially since we've gone video, I'm your host, Dave Nassani, and this show is caregivers of every single kind. And the one thing we know about caregiving and caregivers is that they are caring and they're selfless and they're sacrificial. And oh, yeah, they're very prone to burnout because they tend to put everyone else's needs above their own. Sound familiar? We should take advice from the airlines. You know, they very graciously, when we board the plane, say, in the unlikely event of an emergency, put your own oxygen mask on first before you help your loved one with their mask. And why do they do that? I mean, that sounds so selfish, doesn't it? But you see, from experience, the airlines know that in an emergency, if you don't put your needs above your loved one, you're going to likely black out, and then you won't be of any good to anybody with anything. Now, we also talk about grief and loss here and the devastating effects that it can have on us. It automatically throws us into this other thing called the grief process. Ouch. Unfortunately, folks, there is only one way out of the grief process, and that is to go through the grief process. You can't go around it, over it, under it. No shortcuts. Got to go through it. Sorry. But hopefully we can help you through your grief and your loss if you happen to feel like, you're stuck. Hey, let me take this time now to thank my last week's guest, Sherry White, registered nurse with the University of Arkansas for Medical Science. It was a great show, and as a reminder, you can listen to that interview and watch it on our podcasts on my website, caregiverscaregiver.com. That's caregivers with an S, caregiver without an S.com, because I'm Dave, the Caregiver's Caregiver. You see the connection there? While you're there, don't forget to take our short quiz to see if you're a candidate for burnout. And just for doing that, because I'm such a nice guy from Brooklyn, I'm going to send you my first book absolutely free. What a deal, $10 value. All right, enough of that. Doctor, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for agreeing to this interview today. I really appreciate it. Why don't you take a minute or two and introduce yourself? Just who is Dr. Larry T. Force?
That is a question that could take years of psychotherapy. Okay? But I really do appreciate the call and the opportunity to, come to your platform today and to your audience.
Likewise.
I was talking to somebody the other day, and they said they were born into caregiving, and I thought about that.
Caregiving.
And then she started to talk about, her life and the fact of the things that she had been doing early on in her life as a child, and then as an adolescent, and then into adulthood. And she then repeated it, that she had been born into caregiving. And I thought about that in reference to my own life. I wasn't born into caregiving, but I have an interesting arrangement in my own life. I am the youngest of three boys, but my two brothers were 10 and 12 years ahead of me. So I had the opportunity to have brothers, but at the same time to also have the opportunity and privileges that go along with being an only child. I'm 64, so I was born in 52, and my grandfather died, and during that time, the expectation is that the grandmother would come and live with you. So Nana came to live with us, my father's mother, and originally from Pennsylvania. Then we moved to New York, and when my grandfather died, Nana arrived. So I had always been exposed to the language, the thinking, and some of the actions of older people. Both
Wow,
my
that's cool.
parents worked. Both my parents worked, and as a result of that, she was, the person that was there when I came home from school, and and her network of friends.
Yeah, that was very
Life
common
goes
back in those days.
very common, very common, and the language of older adults. And then she died in '69, and then 5 years later, 6 years later, 5 years later, my father died when I was 21. So I was exposed to, with his death, an off-time death. He was only 55 years of age.
Mm.
Fast forward, after his death, we tried to replicate some of the patterns, and my mother lived with my brother and his family for a while, and then she came and lived with us for a while, and then eventually we all agreed, she really didn't want that. She wasn't Nana. She was, and we weren't. It was a different time. So she went
Yeah.
back to living independently, and she lived independently, a little Irish gal, on her own, for the next, I don't know, probably 21 years, and did very successful. Was very successful at it. When she was 90, but in the meantime, I had developed a career. So I had started in the area of, my first experience was I ran the medical adult daycare program at Burke Rehabilitation.
Mm-hmm.
I'd been teaching as an adjunct at Iona College, and about 2 years after this one class, it was a class of all adults, this fellow calls me and says, listen, he was a former student. We have an opportunity here at Burke back in '79. And he said, we're going to start a medical adult daycare program. And I'd like to know if you'd like to run it. I said, I don't know anything about Alzheimer's disease. He said, we'll teach you. And that was the development of a career. So I was at Burke for a couple of years, and then I started to work in the public sector as a psychologist, and I worked on the adult units. In the meantime, my career was blossoming. Then had a couple of kids, moving along, trying to wrap up my graduate studies, and my aging mother was doing really well, independent. And then when she was about 90 or so, we started to notice there was a hint of, something was going on.
Yeah.
So we take her to her doctor, who she loved. We tell the doctor our concern. She peels my mother off from the waiting room, takes her in the back, comes back 15 minutes later and says, your mother doesn't have Alzheimer's disease. So my brother and I, because she knew where she was, she knew who we
Sure.
were. She could count backwards from 100 to 0 by sevens. But my mother could have done that by fractions, because she was in retail her whole life.
Sure.
So we get out into the parking lot, and my brother and I say, look, this is not what we were hoping for, so we're out of here. So we took her to what's called an ADAC center, Alzheimer's Disease Assistance Center, and we ended up getting a proper diagnosis, and she did have Alzheimer's disease. She lived another 2 years independently. We started to bring on some of the home health care aid. She wanted to stay in her house. And then one day, I know where I was when Kennedy was shot. I know where I was when the astronauts thing went up and was destroyed. And I know where I was when I got this call. And
Wow.
It was September the 22nd. And my brother called me and said, listen, the police have been at Mom's house. They found her. She fell into the bathtub. You need to meet us at the hospital. So I traveled down there. It's 60 miles away. I traveled down there all the time thinking, I hope she didn't break her hip, because if she broke her hip, it's going to be a game changer. Well, the good news is that she did not fracture her hip, but she fractured her neck, which was the horrific news. So now she's 92. She's going through some cognitive, stuff going on, and she has a fractured neck. So we tried to treat it without any type of, operation. That didn't work. And then eventually she was operated on, survived it, and ended up in a nursing home, and she flourished there. So that's, so I mean, I come to this table, Dave, not only from a theoretical perspective or a knowledge-based perspective, but I have lived it. I wasn't born into it, like that friend of mine said, but I have lived this world of caregiving for years.
I know
And
that's so
as you said,
unusual. That's unusual. A lot of so-called experts, never really had the experience of caregiving. I mean, and there's an old saying, you just have to. It's better felt than telt. You know what I mean?
without a doubt, without a doubt, because it's a whole different experience. The experience of living as a caregiver is completely different than talking about it.
Yeah.
Than just talking. Just staying 2 or 3 chapters ahead of students. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
So that's how the book came about, and it was kind of like a double barrel experience because as then my mother passed away, and my wife has 2 parents that lived on Long Island, and my father-in-law was 90, and he started to reel. And last December we were going to Florida just for a couple
Mm.
days of respite, my wife and I. And obviously, what happens with caregiving. It's the old thing that man plans and God laughs. I mean, it was, we then, he was starting to really experiencing some difficulty, so we didn't go. And
Mm.
I'm sitting in a Starbucks 90 miles away from the airport, thinking that this is the day I was going to be flying out. And I started to write because that's what I do. I write. And what I started to write about, what came to me were the common experiences. My practice, I have a private practice, and my practice deals with individuals that are dealing with caregiving, individuals that are dealing with normative anxiety and depression in adulthood, and individuals that are dealing with addictions in adulthood.
Really?
And what I started to realize is, why could we not have the same thing available for caregivers that we have for individuals who are wrestling with addictions? We have
Mm.
crisis, we have detox, we have rehab, and we have community fellowship. And what I started to write and advocate for was that those types of programs and services should be made available for caregivers. And
Absolutely.
that's when the Detoxing of Caregivers surfaced as a title, and that's when I
Ah,
started to work on the book.
I got it. Yeah, that was a great title of your book, The Detoxing of a Caregiver. Is that what they say,
Yes,
right?
yes, yes.
Now, let me back up to some of the stuff you said. How hard was it you said she flourished in a nursing home. How hard was it for you to actually put them there? Because so many,
It was horrible,
yeah,
absolutely horrible.
difficult decision.
I mean, the reality is, we both, my brother and I, said to her, "Come and live with us." And I live in a rural section of New York, and she's like, "I'm not going to the country." So although she was dealing with some dementia, she was clear enough to say, "I'm not going to the country." We we thought about trying to maintain her where she was in her home,
And she was
but
alone at her home, by the way.
yeah, she lived alone. She lived
Yeah.
independently,
So
but
you
it wasn't.
probably let her live alone way too long than you should have, right?
The reality is, when you look back on it, especially with my father-in-law, we waited too long. We tried to
Yeah.
encourage independence, but we waited too long, because then when it started to cascade down, there was no way that we could then talk about any transition.
Yeah, it's very, very common. With our mother, we waited too long to take away the car till she had an accident. We waited too long to get her out of her home, and we waited too long to get her out of independent living into assisted living, and then vice versa. Waited too long to get her out of uh, into the nursing home. She had dementia, and so I'm concerned because I'm getting forgetful. I mean, you and I are almost the same age. You're just a little older than me, and I'm forgetting things a lot more than I used to, and I worry that maybe it's genetic. And so I saw this ad a couple of years ago that said they're doing a study on early detection of dementia and Alzheimer's, and if you want to sign up, it's free. Da da da. So I've been seeing this memory doctor for like 3 years now. Every 6 months, I take the test, count backwards from 7, and try to understand. And so far they says, well, your memory isn't great, but you're under the borderline. You're not someone we would be worried about yet, but let's just keep watching it. And each year as I go, I'm not getting any worse. In fact, I'm getting slightly better because I took up some new hobbies. I playing the piano and this radio show and just doing things to get the spider webs out of the brain.
Sure, sure. I had an experience. I've been involved with the Alzheimer's Association for years. I sat on the board. I've conducted some support groups for them, and they asked me one time, would I run an early onset group? So my experience professionally with Alzheimer's to that date had been with individuals who were in late stages of Alzheimer's.
Uh-huh.
So now I'm going to go run this group, and starts in February, and it was snowing out. And I remember driving, getting my material ready, going out to my car to drive over to run this group, and the last thing that I heard rolling off my top of my roof of my car was my coffee cup. And I started to laugh that, here I am going over to help individuals with early onset Alzheimer's disease, and I'm forgetting my coffee cup on top of my car. But the reality is, as I tell my students, because I get this all the time, the question, look, I'll hear questions, my mother and father had Alzheimer's disease, or am I at higher risk, And here's my answer, my best answer. I don't know. If you tell me your identical twin has it, that changes the whole story. But if you tell me that it's in the family, I don't know if that's going to manifest in you. We just don't know. And as you say, the things that you're doing, I mean, I have a personal belief, no evidence to prove it except from what I've witnessed, but I have a personal belief that college professors are at minimal risk for presenting the issues associated with Alzheimer's disease. And the reason is because we're continually, surrounded by youth, beauty, creativity. We're continually engaging. We're mastering material. We're doing presentations. We're doing review, and analysis. And because we're still connected. And my personal belief is that you can lather yourself with as much anti-aging oil as you want. You can suck down as many supplements as you want. But if you divorce yourself from purpose and meaning, you will disengage and you will age much faster. And I think
did you say being a college professor puts you at less risk?
Yes.
Or more risk?
Less risk.
Yeah, that made sense. I thought I heard you say more.
Risk. No, less risk.
Okay.
Because of the fact that we're continually active, we're continually involved. And this idea that
sorry for interrupting, but there are a number of professors, brilliant professors, who have succumbed to it. How do you explain that?
Well, I think if you look at the general population, I haven't drilled down enough to take a look at it from a statistical perspective. But what I see with my colleagues is that many of my colleagues are 20, 25 years older than me, and they're still engaged. They're still teaching. And I think it's because of the fact that they're still connected.
So it's true when they say you retire, you die.
Retiring for me
in one way or another.
Right. People ask me, would I ever retire? Retiring for me would be like divorcing myself. Why would I want to do that? This is who I am. This is not what I do, but this is who I am. And the fact of retiring, I just can't see that. It's not in my landscape.
So how early can they actually detect Alzheimer's or dementia? They're doing a study to see if they can do early detection. What is early detection? Before any symptoms occur, before the brain is damaged? What is early detection?
We know we're getting better at this. Back in 1979 at Burke Rehabilitation, the belief was, could this be a virus? That's why some people get it and some people don't. And the scientific exploration at that point was seeing if this was a viral connection rather than anything else, rather than neurological and brain disease.
Trying to think outside the box.
Way outside the box.
Yeah.
The earliest case.
I'm sorry, I keep interrupting you.
No, we're having a wonderful conversation.
If I don't say it, I'm going to lose it. You see, that's the problem.
Yeah, go ahead.
I read an article of how cannabis, THC, will prevent dementia in older people before they get it. Now, once they get it, you can't do anything about it. Have you heard that? Is that true?
I haven't heard the cannabis issue, but we were using at that point nicotinic acid, and we were looking at the impact of nicotine on memory. And it seems that nicotine does enhance memory. Now, the fact is that the people in our Alzheimer group at that point weren't smoking. Now, is it that they never smoked or that they forgot how to smoke? But the fact is that we know that there are so many things that can look. I'm sitting at my office at home. I have an adjacent office right next door. I have a serotonin lamp in there. I use it every day in the wintertime because I know that light, increases the serotonin in my brain. I know that. So the fact is that I use that. Now, is there
You're mimicking the sun?
Mimicking the sun. I have a dear friend that's a psychiatrist that has a belief, kiddingly, but I think he's serious too. He doesn't want any of his patients in convertibles because it reduces their dependency on antidepressants. And the fact is, he's kidding about that, but yet he's being very serious. We know, like in my practice now, over the last 2 years, I've started to institute that if you want to see me, I want you to do two things. Commit to two things. Number one, that you work with a nutritionist. And number two, that you join some type of formal exercise program. People will come to see me to get to a psychiatrist, and they'll go to the drugstore and they'll take their medication every 4 hours as directed. But if I tell them, look, I think you should go for a walk 3 times a week, or maybe a massage twice a month, or maybe do something like that, or join a gym, sometimes they're resistant to that. But that stuff can be so effective. I mean, you even referenced it at the beginning about the fact that you see a slight increase in your memory because you've expanded your interest.
Yeah. Well, listen, we're going to take a short break. Time's flying here, so don't go away. We will be right back.
One Arm, One Leg, 100 Words, Overcoming Unbelievable Hardships is about Charlene, a stroke survivor. Back in 1996, Charlene was a healthy, normal, very active 52-year-old woman whose amazing talents resemble that of both a Martha Stewart and a Wonder Woman. But all that changed when she suffered a massive stroke that left her severely speech impaired and paralyzed on the right side. Who am I? My name is David. I've had the privilege of being Charlene's husband since 1975. We had a wonderful fairy tale storybook-like courtship that culminated in our marriage a year later. Charlene had just come out of a marriage where after 10 years, she received 2 black eyes and a broken nose by her former husband when he came home high on speed. Charlene believed in no second chances of any kind for abuse, so she left. Finding herself all alone in the world with her 5 and 10-year-old daughters, Cynthia Lorraine and Deborah Lynn, she started raising them by herself for the next 2 years. Then fate brought us all together. After falling in love with Charlene, Cindy, and Debbie, our love then produced Rebecca Elizabeth. We had a wonderful, normal life for the next 20 years. But today, things are very different for everyone. One Arm, One Leg, 100 Words, Overcoming Unbelievable Hardships is the amazing story of a woman's fight to survive all that life had thrown her way. Everyone who knows Charlene is thoroughly amazed at how she lives day by day, month by month, year by year, and with a smile on her face and hope in her heart that everything is going to be okay. Her faith in God is her foundation in this hope, that everything happens for a reason, and what doesn't kill her will make her stronger. She inspires everyone who meets her. Her accomplishments since her stroke are very impressive, often making us normal people look like whiners and complainers. So pick up your copy of One Arm, One Leg, 100 Words, Overcoming Unbelievable Hardships today. You won't be disappointed. Just hear what best-selling author Lynn Barrington has to say about it. If you think you have it bad, read this book. This is a beautiful, genuine story told from the heart. It's inspiring and easy to read. When you finish this book, you'll be able to look at your concerns in a new light. How about the reaction of 9-time Grammy and Dove Award recipient, the godfather of contemporary gospel Christian music, Andre Crouch? Charlene just won't let the promises of God go, and she has not let her circumstances get in the way of her faith. She's not just a survivor, she's more than a conqueror, as the Bible states. You'll be encouraged by her testimony, regardless of what you're going through. Available everywhere, but if you purchase your copy directly from the author's website, onearmonleg100words.com, Charlene and David will personally autograph your copy. Enjoy!
And we're back with Dr. Larry T. Force. See, I did that by memory.
That's good.
So, yeah, that's my wife. Amazing woman. Been married 41 years now, and we're lucky to have each other. People say,
But what a powerful story.
Yeah, well, I had nothing to do with it. We play the cards we're dealt, and we don't know who we are until things happen. You don't know who you are or not when the bank account's full and the wife is happy. You know who you are when you're broke and the doctor says you have cancer and your wife says she's going to leave you, and and the checking account's overdrawn, and that's the true measure of a person.
Yeah, but
And
I hear what you say about the value that you have for her, but I think sometimes caregivers have a tendency not to understand the importance that they bring to the person's life too.
yeah.
I mean, think. I mean, as grateful as you are for her, I know that she's as grateful as well for you.
Well, I hope so, and I believe she is as well. She can't communicate it with, although she's a great communicator, even though she can't speak. They say communication is, some say 80%, 85%, 75% nonverbal.
Hmm.
And it's true. I mean, we're waiting for a table at a restaurant, and I see her. She strikes up a conversation with some guy while we're waiting for a table, and they're talking for 20 minutes and laughing and slapping each other on the back. And I'm saying, my gosh, he doesn't even realize that she can't talk, but she's nodding, she's gesturing, she's smiling, she's
Hmm.
touching, she's
Hmm.
she's pointing, and I'm amazed,
Hmm.
just amazed.
Hmm. Hmm.
But
Well,
she can say
bravo,
no
bravo to
about
both of you.
she can say no about 100 different ways, and which no is really bad and which no ain't so bad, and we don't realize that our words are less important than our actions and our tonality and our body language, etc.
Absolutely,
And
absolutely.
unfortunately, I hate playing charades. It's one of my worst games, and now I have to play charades the rest of my life. So
Hmm. Hmm.
anyway, back to you. I made some notes here. Caregiving is a normative part of the developmental stage of adulthood. Adults can expect to provide care for another. What does that mean?
Well, there was outliers before. I mean, not everybody that I grew up with had grandparents. A lot of their
Mm,
grandparents had passed away. But
yeah,
with the increase in longevity now, the chances that are higher that you will become a caregiver than they are that you won't. I think it's an exception if you're not a caregiver. As I tell my
absolutely.
wife, I tell my wife, I have two adult sons, and I tell my wife, I hope our kids are watching, because of the
Mm,
fact that we've been in the mix. I mean, and it's not for a weekend. As you know, I mean, you talk about 20 years. I did it for 17 years for my mother, and we're still in the field. My father-in-law passed away, but my mother-in-law is still, in the on on the playing field.
yeah,
And caregiving is there's so many facets to it. There's so many faces
yeah,
to it. It can be rewarding. It can be exhausting. It can be wonderful. It can be horrible. I mean, you know the story.
yeah.
You know.
You talked about the experiences of caregivers. I mean, obviously, I'm telling the world the positive experiences. I have my share of negative experiences as well. I've had
Mhm.
my share of just reaching, the end of my rope, so to speak, and
Mhm.
especially in the beginning when she was, not very lovely, going through the grief process, just angry with and the closest person around, which is the caregiver, and they usually get the brunt of it. But I learned early on, from caregiver support groups that you got to take care of you. You got to put your needs first, and it just sounds so selfish. If 100 parents were on a plane and the plane was going down and the things came down, I guarantee you, every one of those parents are going to help their kid with their mask before they put their own on. There's just something internal about them. So, I don't
But the
what's
reality is that without you, and I say this in the book, without you, there is no them. I mean, the most important person to care for in the caregiving process is you as the caregiver. Because without your involvement and without your connections, the quality of it's going. And that's why I even talk about that there's time for caregiving and there's time for you. And it doesn't have to be weeks. I mean, obviously there's issues. I mean, we did not go to Florida last year because my father-in-law needed us. But
yeah,
there has to be moments or days or half a day that you can peel away. I talk about the value of going to a spa, getting on a bicycle, going for ice cream, doing something that brings you some type of form of relief and happiness.
yeah. But I always wonder. It seems like 90% of the people I talk to, the caregivers, they don't get it, or they do get it, but they don't do it. And obviously, I'm the exception to the rule. I learned early on I need to take care of me. During that 2-year process, I just I just had to leave and get a family member to watch her, and I went for the weekend to see some family members in New York, and it was so rejuvenating for me. I was having such a great time, and I came back refreshed, ready to go another 10 rounds in the ring, so to speak. And then maybe 4 months, 5 months later, 6 months, whatever it was, I had to do it again. And
Sure.
if I didn't do that, I shudder to think what would have happened to me, what would have happened to us. And why is it so hard for caregivers to learn this concept? They say, well, I
Because I
can't
think
find
they
anybody. I
feel,
get no help. But you know what? You do what you must do. And if
when
you
I, you
don't,
know,
go ahead.
after my mother died and my father-in-law then appeared as the main focus, I said to my wife one day as I was writing the book, that these are the things that we should talk about. That these are the things. She said, "Well, I don't have time to do that." But interestingly enough, and I pointed this out to her, you say you don't have time to do that, but this morning you attended a gym class. This afternoon we took our dog for a walk on a golf course. You have to understand that those things, okay, as simple as they are, add value to your life. And I think sometimes people don't pay enough attention to some of the things that they might be doing. We're not talking about going to Europe for 6 weeks. That's unreasonable. It's not going to happen. But the fact is, the things that you're doing on a daily basis that bring relief to you. But I think caregivers, it's guilt, it's anger, it's frustration. The family dynamics. I wrote an article one time about the different styles of adult caregiving, and this was years ago before I was really in the mix. And
Talk about that.
what I could see from my practice is that there were three main styles that I identified, and I called the name of the article was called "Heroes, Martyrs, and Snakes: Adult Styles of Caregiving." So the heroes were the individuals that just did it, and because it had to be done. The martyrs were the individuals that did it and let everybody know it was being done, and then the snakes kind of slithered away. And then I realized that there was another group out there that I had not identified. Now, these individuals weren't present as well, but they weren't snakes. So I went back and I rewrote the article and I called it Heroes, Martyrs, Snakes, and the Devastated. Because there are some people that can't be present because they're devastated, not because they just can't watch the demise of the person they love. As I was writing the book and talking to some friends about it, one of my friends said, well, she saw another group out there, the wolves, the individuals that come in and just, consume all the power of the dynamics of the family. And then I started to think, and I said, yeah, and I see another group out there, the liquidators, the group that comes in and they're more worried about the assets than they are about the person. So what's come from that is there are a variety of different styles of caregiving.
Wow.
And everybody has a different take on it. And let's not forget, there is a major, I identify myself as a caregiver, but I was not doing the same thing for my mother that my wife was doing for her father. There's taboo issues too. My brother and I, yes, we were there, we were present, we were facilitating, we were coordinating, but we weren't bathing our mother. There's a whole taboo issue about that. So the fact is the male perspective of caregiving is much different than the female perspective of caregiving. When I was writing my doctoral dissertation, I did it on the impact of kinship on accessing adult daycare. And I looked at the differences between husbands, wives, and daughters. Wives didn't even consider themselves as caregivers. They had been doing this all the way through their life. They didn't even know sometimes what I meant by being a caregiver. Husbands, they thought that they were caregiving as long as they could drive. Once they're not able to drive, then, other things started to happen. But daughters, they could almost tell you the clothing they were wearing the day that they found out they were going to be caregivers. And sons, there wasn't enough of a group out there of sons to actually bring into my study that I had access to. So it's different styles, and gender really does matter, without a doubt.
Wow, I love that description of the styles: heroes, martyrs, snakes, the devastated, the wolves, and the liquidators. I can see that absolutely so clearly. That's great. Let's talk about dimensional solution-based treatment. What is that, and is it effective?
Yes, I think it's very effective. Look, I tell my students that it's like going to a restaurant where you order part of your menu from A, part of your menu from B. It's okay to take A and B. just as long as you know where it comes from. Same thing when it comes to theoretical practice. My training was in psychoanalytic perspective, and then behavioral psychology, and then in task-centered. So I had different orientations, and each of them is like a lens. Like they look at the world differently. It's like putting on those eyeglasses and you see the world differently. If you bring together 4 or 5 psychologists and you give them a behavior and say, please, interpret it, the interpretation will be dictated by their training. So my training is in psychoanalytic, behavioral, then task-centered, and then I came across solution focus. Solution focus, it was almost like a breath of fresh air. It wasn't just talking about pathology anymore. It wasn't talking about problems. It was talking about the here and now and the solutions. It hit me one day back, 15 years ago. I'm in New York. I'm going to a conference in Europe. I'm spending the night in New York, and all of a sudden it hit me. And what hit me was the question, a very simple question. Why is it that some people make life look, they can master it? They can get over the things that you talked about at the beginning of the show. And other people, everything is chaos. Their desk is chaos. The inside of their car is chaos. Their life is chaos. Everything is a problem. And then I started to think about it. And in our field, most of the psychological theories are like staircases. They talk about stages. You start in infancy or prenatal, then you go up to infancy and childhood. You work your way up. But there's not a lot of emphasis about what happens in those stages. And then it hit me. Those things are dimensions. And what I realize as a therapist is I tell my clients at the very beginning, I can't fix you because you're not broken. I'm not a hero. I cannot fix you. And the fact is that when I work with people, one of the things that I say is that I'm not your hero. I can't fix you. So the fact is that with dimensions, I can't change your age. I can't change your dimensions, but I can help change the way that you look at these things. And the work really is internal. It's attitudinal. If the person can feel differently about themselves, they will feel differently about the situations that surround them.
Yeah,
And
attitude.
that's where this attitude. And it's not 20 years of in-depth psychotherapy. It can happen almost miraculously. How you look at the world is dictated by how you feel about yourself. And if you're doing things like taking care of yourself, going to some type of formal exercise program, walking, doing things like that, hydration, water, it has a tremendous impact. I go to the gym every day now for the last 4 years. Somebody says to me in the locker room, why do you go every day? I said, to keep my youngest guy off my shoulders because he was all over me. You got to go, you got to go, you got to do it, Dave, it has changed my worldview. I have gym buddies. I'm not Arnold Schwarzenegger, but I have gym buddies. I'm involved in a community now. I'm active. It's a whole different perspective. So I know that it works. So the dimensional solution-based treatment consists of not only, in our field, we have this biopsychosocial perspective. I'm challenging it that we should remove that. And we should make it a cognitive movement energy perspective. That if you're going to treat the person, then you got to treat the whole person. This like holistic triage, this idea of treating. So the person comes in and they want to change. They're not doing well. They don't like their world the way that they are. You ask them about their diet. They're drinking 6 Cokes a day and eating 14 bags of potato chips. How do you expect to feel? I mean, the reality is that I'm not telling you have to become a vegetarian, but you have to pay attention to the things that you are doing and the things that you're ingesting. You do.
Yeah, the glass is either half empty or half full as far as attitude goes.
Without a doubt.
So it seems to me like all these people have one thing in common, caregivers I'm talking about, and that's how they react to stress. Talk about that. Stress, that nasty word.
It's as individual as a person's life. Some people, it's like depression. Depression is very hard sometimes to diagnose because it doesn't look sad. It can look agitated. It can look manic. And the fact is that when it comes to stress, individuals feel it differently. Some people internalize it. Think about the relationship that people have in the workplace or in their relationships. Some people, when they get angry, they want to talk about it. Other people, they internalize it. Everybody handles it differently. But the fact is that it seems to be a very, very significant part of the caregiving experience. And how could it not be? How could it not be? Where did you expect to be? That's one of the things I talk to people about when they talk about where they are. It's a validation. Where did you expect to be at this point? Think about the things that you're doing and you're juggling. I mean, you are sitting here now as a long-term caregiver. Other people are entering, today or tomorrow, and their way of dealing with things is going to be completely different because you have now adapted to it. You now have strategies or resources or patterns. Other individuals, it's like landing on Mars and they get out of the spaceship for the first time. They have no idea where they are, and you have created a tremendous support network. And I'm not blowing smoke around the room here on your radio show, but think about what you've done. You've taken a situation and you have completely evolved it and morphed it into something that has a positive growth outcome.
Yeah.
Not everybody does that. Some people curl up. Some people move into aberrant behaviors like addiction. Some people, they just can't do it. They just disappear. But you didn't do that.
And I didn't always have the support of my wife. She just looked at it as a competitor for her time. So, she really didn't want me to do all of this, but I had to, and I told her, listen, I have to do this. I'm the caregiver. I've got to put my needs first. She still doesn't get that whole concept, but you know what? She doesn't have to, because I know that if I don't do it, she's in trouble. That's all I know.
I love the European perspective. The European perspective is that they don't refer to it as a title of caregivers. They refer to individuals as carers.
Carers.
It looks like careers spelled incorrectly, but it's carers, C-A-R-E-R-S. And that's what we are. We're carers. And in order to be a good carer, I have to take care of me. The last group of people that you want, having a resentment, or your surgeon if they're going to operate on you, your pilot if they're going to fly you, and your caregiver if they're going to take care of you. You don't want them full of resentment.
Yeah, you have to treat them nice.
Exactly.
Or they may spit in your water or do something to your food. No, they wouldn't do that, but you never know. Some paid caregivers, they're not doing it for the love of caregiving. They're doing it for a paycheck. And I always question, the motives of a paid caregiver. Now, there are wonderful, wonderful paid caregivers out there. But I've met a few who, they need to retire and go into a different industry because they are burnt, fried to a crisp, and they
I think that's true of any industry. I mean, whether it be the academic industry or whether it be, the public service industry, some people they're just sending their bodies to work, and it's time to go home.
Yeah. Well, listen, believe it or not, we've come up to our second break. So let's take a break, a breather, and don't go away. We'll be back in a couple of minutes.
Anytime we suffer loss, we grieve. And a lot of people don't realize what even the grief process is. But it could be 5 to 7 steps ranging from denial, I don't believe this is happening, anger, oh my gosh, I'm so upset this is happening, to a form of bargaining, how can I get out of this, to depression, which is a very serious thing because that often leads to suicide. And then finally, after you realize you have no more control over your situation and you're totally okay with the new normal that it brings, that wonderful, wonderful place called acceptance.
Being a caregiver takes a special person with passion and compassion. But even you can become a little burned out from time to time. The Caregiver's Caregiver radio show was developed to help you overcome obstacles, adversity, and burnout, as well as just having a place to rest, relax, and recharge your batteries. We've all been there, and you're not alone. Now, you can take the Caregiver's Caregiver with you. Get the top 25 radio shows in convenient form that plugs right into your USB car stereo or computer. Learn the techniques, tips, and encouragement we all need to better handle the day-to-day challenges. For around $1 per show, just $29.77, get the credit card-sized USB card to have with you anytime you need a caregiver's pick-me-up. Just go to DaveTheCaregiversCaregiver.com and order yours today. Go to DaveTheCaregiversCaregiver.com now. Consider it an investment in you, and ultimately, an investment in them.
And we're back with our guest, Dr. Larry Force. Wow, we've got about 10 minutes to go, so let's concentrate on what kind of resources are available for caregivers. Back in the olden days, the only thing you could do is go to a meeting, which was very inconvenient. But now with the internet, they've got lots of options, don't they?
When I teach the psychology of aging course, I talk to my students. I give them the example of it's like a curtain. I'm going to pull back the curtain, and I'm going to show you a whole network out there that's relatively invisible. And as a caseworker, which I'm training them to be, is being able to navigate these particular paths about how to access these services. The United States is a very moral country, and our morality is found in our IRS codes. We have a belief that people should have families, a tax credit's given. We have a belief that people should buy houses, a tax credit is given. We believe that people should take care of the children and the elderly, tax credits are given. And when you think about this, back in the 60s with Johnson's Great Society, what was formed, what was evolved was the Older American Act. Now, this is not bedtime, this is not let's stay up and read all the way through the night. It can be very dry, but it's a policy which is the locomotive that funds a lot of these programs and services. When somebody shows up at your door from Meals on Wheels and gives you a $9 meal and charges you $3 for it, the question should be, where does the rest of the money come from? And then the Older American Act talks about how the money is transferred from the federal government to the state to the local, county government. If you are a United States citizen, you're entitled to services, with or without resources. If you're over the age of 60 and you're a United States citizen, that's the means. If you're younger than 60, then you're kind of like out there. But if you're over the age of 60 and you are a United States citizen, you are entitled to services through the aging network. That aging network looks completely different depending upon what part of the country you're in. When I worked for the state for years, I was under the belief that everybody did business like New York. So in New York, there is a New York State Office for Aging, and then there are 59 counties in New York. Each county has their own county office for aging, which is run by government. It's different. My colleague and I, Jeff Kahana, about 9 years ago, received an NIH grant to do a national survey of the AAAs, the area agencies on aging. And what I was struck by immediately is that New York is one of the few states that actually runs aging services through government. Most of them are nonprofit. So if you don't like the county office for aging in the county that I'm in, you're out of luck. It's like not liking the local Department of Motor Vehicles. But in Florida and other states, if you don't like one office for aging, you can go to the one 3 blocks away because they're nonprofit and they're competing for your business. So the fact is that the caregiver has to understand that you are entitled because of your citizenship and because of your age to services through the Office for Aging, through that network. And how you get to it, whether it be on the internet or via your phone or a letter, is to contact your local county Office for Aging or your local Office for Aging in your county. That's the way you access the system. Now, you talked about the internet. I mean, the internet, has brought so many resources to the table for the caregiver. There's no doubt about it, including the service that you're providing. Even, during the break, I was looking at, what was coming across. Think about what you're saying. You are the caregiver's caregiver. You are there for individuals who are trying to navigate this system. I know acronyms. I work for the public sector. I know how to navigate a system. But even when we were trying to access services for my father-in-law, it was difficult. And I know the landscape. So can you imagine what it's like for an individual that has no understanding of the network or the acronyms that go along with agencies? And we need individuals like yourself who can reach out and say, hi, I'm here, and I can help you navigate the system or connect you to services. But not everything is a service. About 10 years ago, 9 years ago, I was involved in a project in a state out west. They had been sued because they had deinstitutionalized 700 people back in the 1970s. And now somebody was saying that they had abandoned these individuals from institutions. So we put together an assessment team, and we went out there and we assessed them. And this is what we found, that the people that did not receive formal services were actually doing better than the people that did. And from that paradigm, from that experience, we created a paradigm called naturally occurring living communities. So we have these naturally occurring retirement communities. We have AARP running around with their livable community, domains. But let me take you to a movie, and it's a 3D movie. And I'm going to ask you to put on a set of glasses. And once you put on a set of glasses, you're going to see things you never saw before. And that's the naturally occurring living community. Not everything is an agency response. Think about the other resources that are already embedded in your community that can be of value. Domino's a couple of years ago did this big thing about this. They did a nice thing. This worker noticed that a customer wasn't coming in on a regular basis, so they went to their home and they broke into the home and they found the person on the floor, and they should be applauded for what they did. But years ago, we called them neighbors. Okay, this whole idea of a community. I mean, you need to be thinking about what's already embedded in your community that can be of value to you. A lot of the pharmacies now are sending out text messages telling you that your prescription is ready. And at the end of it, it says, if you're having problems, text in the word help. Okay, so that you can, if you can't get to the pharmacy, or you're down on the floor or something like that, or you're in bed or whatever, text in help. And I think with technological support, we can provide more of that type of connection, that you don't have to age alone. You don't have to be a caregiver alone. There's nothing like a beating heart. I tell my students, 2 things you take into a family today, your heart and technology. You can only take one, you take your heart. But there's so many technological support services out there that can be of value in helping the person go through this process.
Yeah.
So the takeaway to the question is, are there services? Enormous amount of services. You just need to know how to access them. And one of the major ways of accessing them is being aware of the fact that you have this network, this program, this whole, industry about how to help people.
Yeah. So in the next 4 minutes now, let's talk about how do caregivers maintain their social connections and, maintain a sense of hope. Hope is so important. Without hope, the Bible says people perish.
Look, people live uniquely, they die uniquely, they grieve uniquely. And one of the things that we know about caregivers is the fact that there's almost like a dual grieving process. Because the first thing that happens is they grieve the loss of the person, and then they adapt to it. And then we catch up to them 6 months later, years later, and then they actually grieve the loss of the person when they die. And the fact is that you need to be able to, look, I tell my friends, I will never get over the loss of my mother. She was a great lady. I have just learned how to live alongside of it. And the fact is that it's not getting over it. I'm not discarding it. But the fact is I'm learning how to live alongside of it. And the fact is, without a sense of hope, there's darkness. And it doesn't mean 20 years of psychotherapy. It can start today. Somebody hears this radio show and they make a commitment to themselves that they're going to change the way that they do business. Nancy Reagan and Albert Ellis, although they were 2 different figures, had a very similar approach. And it was like Albert Ellis, well-known psychologist, working with the alcoholic. You want to stop drinking? Then stop. Nancy Reagan working with the whole community of drug addiction issue. Just say no. It sounds simplistic, but if you don't like the way that you're living the caregiving life that you're living, then don't live it that way. Stop it. Change it. It can be that quick, and then figuring out strategies of how to go about implementing new ways of doing business.
Wow. We can go on and on, but we've run out of time. I just can't believe how fast this hour is gone. Usually when people say, well, how long is the show? I say 1 hour. I say, oh, how are we going to talk for an hour? I says, it goes fast. Don't worry about it. How can anyone get a hold of you?
Well, I have a website, which is drltforce.com. So it's drltforce.com, drltforce.com. So they can find me there. My book is on Amazon. It's called The Detoxing of Caregivers, Key Tips for Survival, Strength, and Patience.
Great
title. And the other way
they
can get a hold of me is with my new friend and contact, Dave. because of the fact that just like I'm going to connect you to people, I know that you'll do the same.
Absolutely.
We're now part of each other's network.
You are now the guru of aging. Well, thank you. And just a reminder, all our shows become recorded podcasts, and they're on our website, caregiverscaregiver.com, and the video casts are on YouTube, and we're also on a host of others that you can see there from the website, like iTunes and podcast.com and all of that stuff. Please don't forget to take that short quiz, Are You a Candidate for Burnout, to assess where you are in the burnout process and get your free copy of my first book, One Arm, One Leg, 100 Words, Overcoming Unbelievable Hardships. So until next Wednesday at noon Pacific time, may God richly bless you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining Dave, the Caregiver's Caregiver radio show. Make sure you tune in every Wednesday at noon Pacific time and anytime afterwards on podcast to catch more of Dave and his tips to caregivers on avoiding burnout and surviving the grief process right here on the Worldwide Blog Talk Radio Network. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.